The spring 2024 season was my favorite season of anime ever. And granted, I've only been watching anime since 2017 and only following anime seasonal since the beginning of 2020, so take that with a grain of salt. But this season had the highest amount of high-quality shows of any season over the last 5 years at least. Especially with how bereft of quality the winter season was, this was just a hugely impressive 3 months of entertainment. But before we get into the movies and the shows that I finished, let's start with the shows that I dropped. A Condition Called Love features our plain Jane hero Hotaru, who catches the attention of the super cute and mega popular Hananoi. And when Hananoi realizes his typical charms don't work on his new crush, he changes his look and his behavior to try to win her heart. It is standard shoujo wish fulfillment, which would be fine if the show had anything else to offer, but beyond some competent visuals, it just serves up a heaping load of mid all around. Tadaima Okaeri features our young couple raising their first child among dissension in their family and prejudice in their society. It positions itself as a show with progressive themes, but with the same-sex couple at the center of it all. Except our couple is not exactly same-sex in universe, but with our redhead Hiromu as a quote-unquote omega, a marginalized classification of gender that allows him to give birth. I don't like and can't defend this choice, not because there aren't inherently good reasons to explore gender differences with allegory, but because this feels like a way this show can center around a gay male couple for the yaoi-loving audience without explicitly calling it a gay show. It comes in different flavors, but it's a familiar tap dance around the third rail subject we see at least once a year. Hello Dragon Maid, hello Call of the Night. What makes this even harder to swallow is that creating a story about male-coded people who give birth shouldn't be that much of a reach. There are men in this world who give birth after all. So yeah, this show started from a bad faith place and doesn't really justify its existence, at least in the first episode, because that's all I gave it. We deserve better. Mysterious Disappearances centers around our hero Ogawa and her battle with writer's block, which she attempts to overcome with the help of a magical tome that ages her down to a time when she was sharper and more creative. This story feels like the work of an author trying to reconcile with losing their creative edge, which I think is a great place to start and could make for a captivating story. Only this show delves a bit too far into the mystic while adding some cheap horror elements to its first episode. I found it a bit too weird to justify its premise, but also not weird enough to actually interest me. Not to mention the beach ball-sized gazongas on our main character is certainly a choice. The Many Sides of Voice Actor Radio features two schoolgirls who discover they attend the same high school when tabbed to work on the same live radio project. I don't have much to say about this show. It's fine, and I'm sure it found its audience. I guess I wanted the show to be Wave Listen to Me, and it turned out to be a lot more conventional. Grandma and Grandpa Turn Young Again is a storybook-like show that features an old couple reliving their youth with all the moments and wisdom they have accumulated in their age. It's a cute premise and one I really wanted to like for some nice escapism, but it became immediately clear that I had no obligation to take this show seriously when the opening credits showed that the artists used the same face for Grandma and Grandpa. And look, I know how hard it is to make a season of televised anime. It's a miracle any of it gets out at all, much less gets out looking good. But if you as a production studio need to cut so many corners that you need to use the same face for the two central non-related characters, maybe you should stop production. At least on that show. There is enough anime in the world. We don't need to do this. Let's move on to the movies. So on a lark, I decided to rewatch Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, a show I liked a lot when I first watched it and still liked a lot upon rewatch. And it was then I discovered that there were sequel movies. First, Rascal Does Not Dream of a Dreaming Girl Dreaming, which came out a few years ago, and the follow-up Double Feature, which came out this year, at least on this side of the world. I quite liked Dreaming Girl. I think it had all the qualities that made the show so engaging for me, and I think the final 20 minutes or so of that movie was brilliant, perfect cinema. But one thing that annoyed me was how the animation quality didn't seem to improve whatsoever, which doesn't mean it was bad, because the show itself looks pretty good and actually has some tasteful CGI use. But I would hope that a movie with more production time and a bigger budget would show out some higher quality visuals. And I'm sorry to report that the double feature looks the same. Or rather, the first part of the double feature, Rascal Does Not Dream of a Sister Venturing Out, looks the same. More on that in a second. I can't say I was looking forward to watching this movie. It focuses on the behavioral struggles of Sakada's little sister Kaede, who was mine and everyone else's least favorite character in the show. And I think the showrunners knew this, because the movie that centers around her storyline is as tame as inoffensive as possible. as if they were like, okay, I guess we have to get through this part of the story. Sister Venturing Out has some good sequences, but it's pretty easily my least favorite Rascal Does Not Dream property yet. But we still get Mai, we still get Sakuta, we get all the teenage angst and Haruhi-like mysticism, so it's still pretty good overall. 7 out of 10. Now, I would like to tell you what I thought of the follow-up, Rascal Does Not Dream of a Knapsack Kid, but I can't because I haven't watched it. I loathe going on unofficial streaming sites to watch anime in general, but made an exception for Dreaming Girl and Sister. Honestly, I'm too old for this nonsense. I have a job. I just want to pay for an app I can put on my TV and press play to watch anime. But whatever. I stream Dreaming Girl, I stream Sister, but Knapsack Kid is nowhere to be found. Or at least I couldn't find it on the only handful of sites I remember from years past. And yeah, I know I can torrent it, but please don't tell me how to do that. I am 31 years old and I do not wish to learn. I'll get around to watching Knapsack Kid eventually. Right now, it's a question mark out of 10. It's worth noting that the Spy Family movie hit theaters over this season as well. I haven't watched it because I just finished watching the previous season with my partner, but I am very excited to check it out. Though not as excited as I am to tell you about the 6 shows from this season that I finished. 4 of which I loved, and 1 of which has become my all-time favorite. I wonder if you can guess which one that is. Bartender Camino Glass features our hero Ryu, a genius bartender who finds ways to help out customers and service professionals all over Tokyo. It's a remake of a show from 2006 and another in a series of anime that feature alcohol as its central theme. And I'm much more interested in that idea than the contents of the show, which for the record are only okay. Because I have mixed feelings about how alcohol is portrayed in shows like Bartender or Grand Blue or Love is Like a Cocktail. On one hand, I appreciate getting a look at a culture that views alcohol differently than mine, if only subtly. When we say that anime as a medium provides shows that Western animation would never produce, I never think of shows like Attack on Titan or Sailor Moon, but shows that display some subtle cultural nuance that doesn't really translate to an American audience. Shows like Bartender, for example. But on the other hand, I think it's kind of reckless to produce cartoons that celebrate the merits of alcohol consumption. Even as someone who does drink, I think the drawbacks of normalizing this sort of stuff outweigh the benefits, regardless of how normalized it already is. With that said, I think Bartender is fine. I like the relaxed tone and low stakes. It makes it feel less like a drama and more like an Iyashikei, which does make it a good drinking show, fittingly. 6 out of 10. Whisper Me a Love Song, or Sasakoi, was the choice Yuri show of the season, with our guitar hero and butch queen Yori falling for our redhead femme Himari. This is the kind of queer show where same-sex relationships are the default in-universe, sort of like Given, and with the rock and roll themes, Sasakoi can be compared to Given on multiple levels. I think shows like this provide for wonderful escapism, but also deal with the hurdle of not being able to use queerness as a point of conflict, which forces the drama to come out of other places. And Sasakoi does that for a bit and doesn't leave us hanging for very long, doing the cool and righteous thing of putting our leads together fairly early in the show's runtime. But things start to fall apart a little bit after that for a few reasons. Horimiya, a beloved rom-com whose praise I don't really get, also fell off after our main couple gets together, but that was because the show had no choice but to focus on its boring side characters. Sasakoi, on the other hand, suffers from the opposite problem, where all of its side characters are magnetic and interesting and worth their own subplots. But because of production delays and a mid-season studio change, we don't get to spend that much time with any of them, and each of their stories feels half-baked as a result. I think there's a world where Sasakoi would be really great with at least 24 episodes to breathe, but as presently constituted, this show might have been better off as like a 3-episode OVA that ends with our lovers pairing up. It's certainly not a bad show though, and if it does get a continuation, I'll be excited to watch. But this show left a lot on the table, unfortunately. 7 out of 10. Oblivion Battery tells the story of an ace pitcher Haruka and his personal catcher and best friend Kei, who dominate the senior leagues in their first act towards baseball glory. But before they enter high school, Kei suffers an accident and develops amnesia, forgetting how to play baseball but wanting to keep in the company of his best friend anyway. Oblivion Battery has a fairly uninteresting setup, and the first few episodes don't do much in setting up anything else worthwhile. Haruka is pretty obviously a Shohei Ohtani analog, Kei is a Kotaro Kiyomine analog based on his family name more than anything, and neither brings much to the table, personally. Well, actually, Kei brings a lot to the table, but he's also the single most annoying protagonist in the history of baseball anime. I mean, he's god-awful. That's not something I can ignore. And if the show had to do with anything other than baseball, Kei's behavior would be enough for me to drop after 10 minutes. But this is a baseball show after all, and this is a baseball channel, so you know. I watched the first 3 episodes and thought, this isn't any good. And then I watched the next 3 and thought, okay, maybe they have something going here. And then the next 3 and thought, I think I might be looking forward to this show. And by the last stretch, I was fully into what the show had to offer. Because there are 2 things that Oblivion Battery does exceptionally well. One is providing dimension to its side characters, sometimes a silly dimension, but also with some serious explorations involved. Like with how our shortstop has to deal with relearning the game after suffering from a case of the yips, or how our second baseman emotionally deals with the realization that he's probably too small to play the game he loves professionally. It takes a while to get to the real stuff, but once you do, it actually has some weight. The second thing that Oblivion Battery does really well is how it presents its baseball scenes. Because holy shit, this is quite honestly the best looking baseball anime of all time. Better than Ace of Diamond, better than Major Second, the best. And that alone makes me excited to recommend this show and hope for a continuation. I think this show could have the legs of something like Ace of Diamond if it gets a foothold into the culture. And if so, we have another long-running high school baseball anime serial to look forward to. 7 out of 10, unless you're a normie, in which case like a 4 or 5 out of 10. Jellyfish Can't Swim in the Night, or Yorokura, was the show I was looking forward to watching the most this past season. You know, besides the big one. Jellyfish really sold me initially on title and poster, looking like a show with shades of K-On!, Wonder Egg Priority, and Oshinoko. All great material to be inspired by, and I think Jellyfish lives up to that potential. This show features our 4 high school-aged heroes as they look to overcome past personal trauma while forming a buzzy online pop band. And while there's enough drama from the premise itself, Jellyfish also balances themes of femininity and labor and individuality, all while mixing in a little bit of queerness, though honestly not enough for all of the attention it got, in my opinion. From its colorful and lived-in visuals to its progressive ideas, Jellyfish is a really ambitious show, and I think it really shines in its strong suits, namely the music, which shows not only in our band's Jelly songs, but also the emotional OP and the excellent score. Our 4 heroes are also magnetic and wonderful and provide a fun ensemble to ride with every week. Actually, let's go with 3 of them. I wasn't the biggest fan of Mei. Sorry if there are any Mei stands out there. There are also a few more weaknesses: the needless fan service, a weird plot point where an adult hires a child to do some really technical artwork, something that just doesn't fly in a show that values realism, and a visual style that, while technically impressive, doesn't really mesh well with the character design and the show's overall tone. I don't know, maybe that was just me. I didn't really see anybody else complaining about the animation. Overall, I think Jellyfish hit a lot of the right notes and provides an uplifting and resonant addition to the canon. The musical canon, the cute girls doing cute things canon, the urban exploration canon, whatever you feel. I wanted Jellyfish to rock, and it most certainly does. 8 out of 10. Train to the End of the World features 4 delightful suburban high school-age girls shortly after a tech-induced apocalypse, as they take over a local train with the intention of traveling to Ikebukuro and finding their lost friend. I can't stress enough how impressed I was with the show's first 4 episodes. It combines a balanced mixture of comedy and horror, all mixed in with some of the most bonkers set design I have ever seen. Our ensemble has a delightful rapport with this rapid-fire dialogue you would hear in something like Licorice Recoil, and the show goes balls to the wall with its ideas about how a techno-future apocalypse would look like. So yeah, I loved how the show kicked off, and if it kept its momentum, I was ready to give it a 10 out of 10. But around the middle of the season, it made a shift away from its horror elements and more towards its comedic elements, which is an understandable but unfortunate change in my opinion. I sulked about this change for a few weeks actually, thinking that it sullied what was an ambitious but impressive show, without realizing that the version of Train to the End of the World that was 90% comedy was still hilarious and really, really good. Eventually, I tried to stop complaining about the trajectory of the show and just learned to enjoy the ridiculous creativity. I'm not sure I ever did, but I would regret not recommending this show highly because it makes so many interesting choices, and it's obvious that a lot of love and creativity went into making this show. I wish the ride had wrapped up a few stops sooner, but it's all quibbling in the end. Train to the End of the World is a great show. 8 out of 10. In the summer of 2017, I was wrapping up my first watch of Cross Game, at one point my favorite TV show of all time. And I remember going to sleep with 3 episodes left in the series and feeling physically sick when I woke up. knowing that I had to go to work and spend the entire day in anticipation of how the show would finish. I couldn't eat. I couldn't concentrate. I was shaking at my desk and trying to explain to colleagues just why I was feeling so awful. And I remember racing back to my apartment after work and watching the last 3 episodes, crying, and then feeling this crushing weight of sadness. Because it felt like I had just exited a world I had spent so much wonderful time in, and I would never be able to relive that experience. I feel like a lot of my anime watching journey since then has been in pursuit of that feeling, as melancholic as it was to feel at the time, because it created such a powerful connection and memory to a story that I've ended up sharing with so many people. I haven't felt that feeling very much since then. It's happened with a handful of movies, most notably with the works of Makoto Shinkai, and it's happened in smaller doses with other shows like Sangatsu no Lion, but I finally felt it again. This time with what I can confidently say is my favorite show of all time. The second televised season of Hibike Euphonium tells of our hero Ome Kumiko's 3rd year in the Kitaoji High School Band, now serving as the band's president and spiritual leader. The band as a group has decided to hold auditions before every major performance, as a way to get the best out of everyone. And this causes tension amongst pretty much everyone, and especially for Kumiko when a UFO playing transfer student arrives. I'm not going to get into every reason why I loved the final season of Hibike so much, so instead I'm going to focus on 5 things I really liked, presented in no particular order.
Hey, editing Yuki here. So yeah, one thing I should mention is that there are spoilers coming up. I don't know, I just got way too excited talking about the show that I couldn't really make it spoiler-free. And yeah, there's not really a timestamp to skip to either. You might as well just stop watching the video right here if you don't want to be spoiled.
Number 5, this season really leans into the Kumiko and Reina ship. Yeah, so if you were disappointed by how little Rumiko or Gumire you got in the second movie, the 3rd season fixes that. There's a lot of intimacy and physical moments, sure, but also a lot of genuine and tender exploration about what each person means to the other. They don't officially get together, of course, but neither does anyone else with anyone else in the show. There is no romance in Hibike, only heartbreak. But at least we get some of the scenes we were hoping for, both as flashbacks to the first season and as a verification of a big gay platonic love. Number 4, the direction of the first big twist is incredible. So here's the setup. Kumiko and Kuroe are both competing for the UFO Soli to perform with Reina at the prefectuals. The band has gone away to their training camp, but instead of the fun getaway romp we get in the first season, the tension here is noticeably high. Because everyone is rooting for Kumiko to win the Soli, but there are some that expect Kuroe to get it. So the final tension building scene arrives, and before we even get to the Soli announcement, we're hit with a handful of twists. 3 tubas in the ensemble? Nope, we're going to 4. And by the way, first year Yayoi is in, second year Satsuki is out. What? But wait, 4 tubas means one section will have 1 fewer member. Which one is it? It's the UFO section, of course, and that means Kanade is out. Wait, what the fuck? What the fuck just happened? How is the bass section upended this suddenly? But there's no time to process it because it's time to announce the UFO Soli, and Taki-sensei sets it up, the camera pans to Kumiko, and he announces that Kuroe has won the part. I was upset for days after I watched this episode. Brilliant, yes, but I was legitimately emotional trying to figure out why the twist happened the way it did. And all I can say to that is that Hibike has some of the best direction and misdirection I've ever seen in a show. It also helps that Kanade is here to talk some sense into people. Number 3, Kanade develops from one of the show's worst characters to one of the show's best. So I didn't care much for Kanade when she was introduced in the second movie. I understand her motivations and everything, but Jesus did she suck. She most certainly does not suck in the 3rd season. In fact, she's probably my favorite character in the show now. Kanade's no-filter approach provides such a needed balance amongst 3rd years blinded by loyalty. She's the only one who processes what happens at the training camp and says, actually, this is bullshit. And then quietly accepts the results because she knows how awesome she is and how she'll have a chance to prove it later. She doesn't put the onus on the victims. She turns straight to authority. More on that later. And I think that's super righteous. Number 2, Kuroe doesn't turn out to be the antagonist we expect her to be. I mean, she is the antagonist by definition, being the person that stands in the way of Kumiko getting what she wants, but she's also never implicated in any wrongdoing, and she's immediately vindicated once Kumiko comes to a better understanding about her desires. Kuroe arrives to the story and we're immediately made suspicious by how she stands out. How talented she is, how unwilling she is to open up, how guarded she acts about her past. and we're immediately led to believe that she's here to take all of Kumiko's shit, because that's what Kumiko believes. But the further and further we get into the story, the easier it is to realize that Gurue doesn't actually do anything wrong. She competes, she wins, she shows all the value that a band like Kitauji's is looking for. And I hated her for that. But it's only when Kumiko sets aside her selfish desires in deference to her position of authority that Gurue becomes vindicated. And speaking of, the number one thing I liked most about this show is that this season's biggest theme is about the merits of questioning authority. The main theme of the first season and second movie is about the tension between talent and seniority, namely which deserves to shine in a competitive situation. It's very anime, very Japanese, and I think Hibike does it better than any show I've ever seen. And the third season starts out with this theme, with the band deciding to hold auditions before every competition, but it slowly morphs into something a bit more complicated when we realize that the authority of our leadership group is breaking down, and the show reinforces Taki-sensei as a mediocre leader despite being a brilliant musical mind. It's really Kanade that kicks off this question. What's the point of following instructions from bad leadership? And that becomes the root cause of tension going forward. Once that tension is resolved by Kumiko apologizing for putting her peers in a bad situation and reinforcing the band's resolve by graciously accepting her loss, Kitauji now has the motivation it needs to reach its full potential. That doesn't come from Reina. That doesn't come from Taki-sensei. That's all Kumiko, even if she is only the second most talented UFO player in the band. I could go on about other things I loved about this season, the developing relationship between Midori and Motomu, the reappearances of old favorites, especially Asuka and Natsuki, our Napoleonic club advisor turning into a blubbering softie around her students, and of course the visuals, the design, the music. Hibike Euphonium is the GOAT, and I know I'm not the only one that says this, but I truly wonder how people rate this past season amongst the rest this story has to offer. Personally, I think it's the highest point of the story. Better than the first season, better than Liz and the Bluebird, and certainly better than the last movie. It's truly the pinnacle of the greatest anime ever made. It's a 10 out of 10, because of course it is. It's Hibike Euphonium after all.